All right, man, peace. So for those of you brothers who've been following my channel long enough, you know that I do follow the New York Giants Monarch athlete, Odell Beckham. It's very obvious to me that he is an MK asset, and he's also an agent of chaos. And as I've told you brothers incessantly in regards to my commentary regarding him, he will be an agent of chaos for his entire career, most likely his entire life, particularly before he turns 30. Now, after he turns 30, he's going to be as chaotic, if not more chaotic, towards himself as he is towards the NFL, assuming that he's even still in the NFL by the age of 30. Because normally at around the age of 30, they start to have a breakdown, what they call self-destruct programming. Now, if it's a diamond level asset, sometimes the breakdown can hold off until they're about 32, 33 years old. But in regards to Odell Beckham, who always seems to be relatively emotionally fractured as it is, it would not surprise me if his breakdown comes right around the age of 30. And even prior to that, you can expect a bevy of hijinks to emerge from him. He recently sat down in an interview with Miss Josina Anderson, quote unquote Miss Josina Anderson, alongside one of his handlers, that being Lil Wayne of Young Money. As I've told you brothers already, Odell Beckham is an apprentice in the craft. One of his handlers is Drake, or really, I should say his quote unquote master in the craft is Drake, because they have a master-apprentice rapport or relationship. And one of his handlers is also Lil Wayne, who's a top witch in the industry, who himself is a Luciferian and a top witch in the industry. Please keep in mind that Lil Wayne's master, quote unquote baby, has a tattoo of the pentagram on the top of his head. So I'm not quite sure how much clearer these guys can make it for you what they're actually about. Odell decided that he was going to sit down and engage in an interview with Josina Anderson and basically attempt to detonate his entire team. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Let's get to the G-Men now, where Odell Beckham stole the headlines on and off the field. OBJ had a lot to say about his Giants. Here he is and how Coach Pat Sherman responded.
I don't regret anything that I said. If it took that for us to come together as a team like we...
And brothers, pay attention. Isn't it strange for someone who likes to dye their hair various colors or dye their hair another color? Normally when you see people who like to dye their hair another color, what they'll normally do is they'll dye it different colors. They won't just keep it one color. That's another tip-off that this person here, Odell Beckham, is under the programming. Because blonde hair is for chaos. Blonde hair is a sign of monarch programming. Once again, Horus, or Heru as the child, was known as Harpocrates in the Greek, or Heru Pa-Kared in the Kemetic language, meaning Heru the child, and he would oftentimes be depicted with blonde hair. He was also known as Cupid in the other cultures. That's why oftentimes he was symbolized with the heart shape. You ever notice how many of these celebrities and entertainers, they like to wear shirts with the heart symbol on it? Odell himself, when he was in the shop, episode 1, LeBron James' show, he had the heart shape on his t-shirt. He's under the programming, man. And I seriously doubt that he will ever dye his hair another color other than blonde. I doubt it. I could be wrong. But I doubt if he will ever dye his hair another color other than blonde.
Like we did today, I can take that every single time.
These are the kind of things, in my opinion, when you have the locker room that we have, that will help galvanize them. Because the locker room took care of it.
I tell you this, Odell Beckham better stay on his P's and Q's. He better raise his game to a whole other level. Because if he's going to start throwing his teammates under the bus, he should be prepared that there may be some whistleblowers in his locker room that may talk about his lifestyle or his life choices. I'll leave it at that. Here's what I know. The Los Angeles Rams are widely considered the best team in the NFL. They have not shown any hesitancy in picking up some of the bigger names all across the NFL, even when they've had baggage. Ndamukong Suh, Marcus Peters, Aqib Talib. These are players who have been arrested off the field or gotten caught up in hijinks on the field. Players who have been cast-offs for the most part. And they did their due diligence in investigating Odell Beckham, and they disliked what they found so much that they told the Giants, you know what, you can keep him. To me, that speaks volumes.
And that's all I'm saying on it. Finito. Done.
The locker room handled it. I find that interesting. But I want to focus on what Odell said, Max. Should he have made those comments to Josina?
Before Max Kellerman answers, because we pretty much already know what he's going to say, Max Kellerman is your classic super liberal Caucasian Jew enabler. He's always going to find a way to co-sign any form of chaos or promotion of discord. That's his MO. Let me say this, Odell Beckham is dead set on being a quote-unquote leader. He believes that there's a correlation between how much money he makes and him being called a leader. Now here's what I'll say. If the owner or the owners of the New York Giants have told Odell that they expect him to be a leader, that's one thing, even though I think that that would be a huge error in judgment on their part. But who knows? As I've told you brothers already, most of these top NFL owners, if not all of them, they know when they have a Monarch athlete or an MK asset on their squad. And they know that sometimes, if you can't win the game, at least win the show. So they might not mind Odell being an agent of chaos. But just on general principles, just looking at this at face value, was it okay for Odell to expose what he thinks is the problem in the Giants locker room to such a degree with so much clarity and transparency? Absolutely not. You have to speak about these issues with your teammates. You have to speak about it with the coaches. And oftentimes people who are immature or who have an issue elocuting themselves or articulating themselves properly, they'll run to the nearest camera because they know that they're going to get frustrated if they try to bring up the issue with the party that they actually have the problem with, because the party that they have the problem with may respond in a way that they may not like. A coach may tell Odell, say if Odell has an issue with play calling, a coach may tell Odell, well, you know what? Why don't you worry about making sure that you run block properly when we give our running backs the football? So then maybe we can diversify our play calling a little bit better. Why don't you make sure that you do that? Why don't you make sure that you finish your routes a little bit better, sell your routes better, so that we can open things up on play action? Odell is somebody who's caught up in the limelight. That's why I stated when he claimed that he's viewed as a zoo animal, all this other stuff, that's what he likes. What type of grown black man goes outside of his house with jewels encrusted on his teeth, with platinum blonde curly tendrils, and with 5 or 6 chains around his neck, hanging out with Drake and Lil Wayne, and claims that he's not interested in getting attention?
Yes, Odell is trying to be a leader. Now, he doesn't have it down perfectly yet, but that's what he's accepted with his contracts. It's not just, I got my money, now I'm going to take it easy. I got my money, now I have a responsibility. By the way, real quick, I love what Sherman did there.
I do too.
If you look at the extended comments, that's the way a coach is straightforward about it. He didn't like the comments publicly. He addressed it with Odell. The team addressed it. The locker room took care of it. That's all he's going to say about it. He did answer another question. They said, wait a minute. You go talk to them if you want to talk to them. It's not bullying. It's, of course, he's angry. He's fed up with the media questions, but he's responsibly answering it and not like bullying media members out.
Media questions. He was fed up with Odell Beckham Jr.
Well, whatever. The point is, that's the way I thought the head coach had handled it appropriately.
I think he handled it well as well, but he better be careful himself. He better get in the habit of trying to head things off at the pass as opposed to always being reactive. Not saying that he's always reactive. This is his first year as Giants head coach. But when you're handling someone as tempestuous as an Odell Beckham, someone who seems to have the lack of self-control that Odell Beckham seems to have, you're going to have to be far more of a forward thinker, especially since it's going to be expected that you know how to deal with his bullshit because of what the Giants front office expects Odell to bring to the table. So it's going to be a very rough going ahead for Mr. Pat Shermer, because for all intents and purposes, Odell Beckham is the alpha on the New York Giants. He definitely thinks that he's a leader. For whatever reason, he thinks that he's a leader, but he does not know how to lead. And he has no respect for Eli Manning whatsoever, not particularly saying that he necessarily should per se. I'm just saying that with someone like an Odell Beckham, you have to have a strong personality at head coach, you have to have a strong personality at quarterback, and your quarterback has to be on the level of an Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. Because if you don't have that, Odell's going to be a problem.
And by the way, whatever you want to say about Odell, well, he's throwing people under the bus, whatever, Giants should have won that game. It's the best they've looked all season. It took a 63-yard field goal to beat them. And by the way, that was with Eli Manning. Terrible. I know he threw 2 touchdowns late.
This clown is so funny. About 3 or 4 months ago, he was talking about Eli Manning as if he was Peyton Manning. Now, Eli has 2 or 3 bad games in a row, pretty much playing the same way that he's been playing the last 5 years or so. and now Eli Manning is the worst quarterback in the league. I have seen no drop-off in Eli Manning from what I saw the last 2 or 3 years at all. I think he's the same player. I think that Eli Manning, over the course of his entire career, I think he's been in the NFL now for about 15 years. He's probably had about 4 good seasons. The year after they won their first Super Bowl, he was very good. The year they won their second Super Bowl was his greatest season, no doubt about it. He was exceptional. And a couple of other years in there. Other than that, for the most part, he's a quarterback who's going to throw for about 4,000 yards. He's going to throw about 25, 26 touchdowns. He's going to throw about 17 interceptions. He's going to complete somewhere around 58 to 60% of his passes. That's who Eli Manning is. That's who he's always been. So he really has not been that different this year. The real issue is that he's shell-shocked from the poor protection that he receives when they try to run pass plays.
Odell Beckham was the best quarterback on the roster in the first half. I mean, Eli has weapons wherever he looks, and he has been terrible. He's cooked. I'm not saying he's not clutch. I know he's clutch.
Honestly, I was amazed when I saw Graham Gano hit that 63-yard field goal at the end of the game. I mean, really. And that field goal would have been good from about 70 yards. I did a John Starks when I saw that shit. I was like, did that dude just did this?
He's clutch. He still has that. He's very tough. Just not good enough anymore. And Odell realizes it's holding the team back. So without mentioning Eli's name, he's saying what everyone knows clearly to be true. And the solution to this issue right now, I will get to a little bit later on.
Okay.
You have to be very careful what you tolerate from great wide receivers, though, because if you let a great wide receiver dictate the protocol of your team, they'll be telling you who should be starting at offensive line. They'll be telling you who should be starting at running back. They'll be telling you who should be starting at quarterback. They'll be telling you who should be starting on the opposite side of them at receiver. As long as everything is geared towards making sure that they shine. That's really all it's about. And Odell even stated in the interview that he looks at all these other top wide receivers across the NFL and they're allowed to complain. Really, who is he talking about? He's talking about Antonio Brown. Because Antonio Brown is really the only other great wide receiver that runs his mouth. You have Antonio Brown, you have Odell, you have Julio Jones, and you have A.J. Green in Cincinnati. A.J. Green and Julio Jones, you don't hear a peep from them. So he's not talking about them. We know who he's talking about. Even DeAndre Hopkins down there in Houston, you very rarely hear anything from him. So we know who Odell is referring to. He's referring to his homeboy out there in Pittsburgh, Antonio Brown.
Here's the deal. First of all, you're wrong about that. And I don't have anything against Odell Beckham Jr. I got a lot of love for him. He's a great, great talent. He's a decent dude as well. But let's be clear. You can't condone what he did. And the reason why you can't condone what he did is because the veracity of his comments are irrelevant. Everybody could see what's wrong with the New York Giants. And I will say that I said this last, I think it was Friday when we first...
And let me say this also. If he wants to take the leadership approach, all he has to do is get the guys together in the locker room and say what he feels needs to be said to try to, quote unquote, galvanize the troops. But once again, when you galvanize those troops or when your mind is set in that direction, you better make sure that you have all of your I's dotted, all your T's crossed, man. You better make sure that you're on your P's and Q's.
First learned of his comments. Give him credit because he didn't name names. So there is a distinction there where he didn't name names and was pointing specific guys out. But
right, but Steve, sometimes that's even worse. Because Josina Anderson asked him directly about the quarterback. We know who the quarterback is. I mean, he made references to the offensive line, so we know who plays on the offensive line.
Let's not sit here and act like he deserves applause for what he said. He was wrong to say what he said. It's no question about it. And this is the biggest reason why, Max, and I respond directly to what you said. What if dudes decided to tell the truth about Odell?
Ooh.
How do we know what that would amount to? What I'm saying to you is this.
In other words, Stephen A. Smith, what do you know about Odell that they could talk about? Because I'm sure that when Stephen A. Smith says it, he's not talking about on the field. He's talking about some things that he might know about Odell off the field.
Be careful when you, trust me, be careful when you're all about honesty and openness and veracity when talking about people you deem to be the problem as opposed to yourself, because you never know when those tables can turn.
On the field?
No.
On the field. That's all he's talking about.
Well, you can say that, but
while it's on the field.
Wait a minute. But there are things that happen on the sidelines and things of that nature. You can have guys that can talk about what he does in the locker room. You can have guys that can talk about what he does at practice and beyond, and how a distraction it may be. You could have had guys that were, just imagine for a second, if guys were willing to speak out when he was in pursuit of his money.
Or shit, what if you had guys that were willing to speak out when the man was dropping everything in that playoff game in Green Bay? Dude had about 3 or 4 drops in that game. He was terrible.
Imagine what kind of deterrent that could have potentially been for Odell Beckham Jr. They never did it. And so you got to look at it from the standpoint that although he may have been truthful, it was unnecessarily so, and to some degree a bit disingenuous, because you pointing the fingers at others at a time where after you got your money, and there's very little that could be pointed in your direction, negating the fact that when there was a lot that could be pointed to your direction, there was a whole bunch of people that never said a damn word about you.
Well, if I may, so this, by the way, this is why you should sit there and not there, right? Because we did this on Friday, and I didn't know you thought any of that. We disagreed on Friday, and we did for these reasons. When we remember this argument, is it offensive if it's true? Remember that? Is it offensive if it's true? Even if Odell is right.
I have news for you, Will Cannon. You probably know this already. Oftentimes, the truth is more offensive than a lie. Because for the most part, people tell lies so that they can assuage certain negative feelings, or they can help someone feel better about themselves, or they can allow themselves to escape a situation that could become precarious. The truth is like a sword because it cuts, and you have to understand how to wield the sword, because if you want to take your sword out of its sheath for any little reason, that might prompt other people to take their swords out of their sheaths for any little reason in offense. You should try to use your sword only in defense of yourself, and use it very, very sparingly in offense. Because if you don't utilize a certain amount of discipline or discretion in how often you want to use your sword, i.e. the truth, you can end up causing a big sword fight where you get cut up a whole bunch of times, man. You have to be very, very careful with how willing you are to be fully transparent in what you think about every last thing and every last person. It takes time to get to understand the situation. A lot of brothers ask me about a lot of stories that pop up in the media. When are you going to talk about this? When are you going to talk about that? That's why I say I like to wait to see how things transpire. Because when you're a hot take artist, you end up looking like a fool oftentimes, because you're not examining things from as many angles as could be available. So the truth is a very, very powerful thing. Once again, it is like a sword. And if you're not careful, you might end up stabbing yourself.
You said the great word veracity. If all of it is true, what he's saying about Eli and the offense, does that give him license to say it? No. And does it make it good leadership if it's true? Hell no. That doesn't make a good leadership. Throwing teammates under the bus, putting blame on everyone else but yourself, even if it's true, is not good leadership. It's bad for the team. And by the way, Steve...
Let me say this. I don't agree with that totally. I think that there's a time to be transparent. There's a time to be forthright. But even when you're forthright, you have to do it in a way where you understand why you're doing it. You just can't say what you feel at a particular moment, because your feelings could be incorrect. And words like toothpaste, once they're let out, you cannot bring them back.
Stephen A. said, what if other people talked about Odell? I said, what if we extend it to off the field? And you said, no, not off the field, on the field, because of professionalism. It's not professional to throw your team.
I have two questions.
Hold on, wait, let me just say, how did the team respond? That was the best performance of the season. Because of that. 100%. Sherman said they handled it in the locker room. Eli was bad all game until the very end. Odell was trying.
Well, if Eli was bad the whole game until the very end, how could you claim that Eli's success at the end of the game was due to Odell? If he played better for the whole game, then you would have had more substance for your attempt at a point.
Trying too hard and made a few mistakes, but the passion, the reach was the reach was exceeding their grasp.
Matt, you think that was Odell's agenda, to make his team play better, and he accomplished that?
Yes, and what happened was, look, there are different ways of leading, different styles of leadership. The Giants, Saquon Barkley.
Let me say this also about the New York Giants. They have to be very, very careful who they allow to be leaders, because your leader is going to influence everybody under you. Right now, Odell is trying to take Saquon Barkley under his wing, quote unquote. And Odell's influence on Saquon can affect how Saquon views himself. It could affect how he starts to interact with his teammates, with the media. So, I mean, it is what it is. Once again, it was very glaring to me when I found out that the LA Rams had investigated Odell Beckham and they decided to pass on him after taking on Aqib Talib, Marcus Peters, and Ndamukong Suh.
Saquon Barkley seemed fine with it. Saquon Barkley seemed fine with his comment.
Right, but Saquon is a rookie. How can we use him as a barometer for what's acceptable in the locker room? He's just trying to not make waves.
Comments in the locker room, his play on the field. This Giants team, led by their best players, who are clearly and by far Odell Beckham Jr. and Saquon Barkley, may be the kind of team that's a passionate, hard-on-the-sleeve team.
Max, you are really, really big when you can't be on pointing to history as a buffering point for your arguments. Well, listen to this. Historically, when wide receivers speak out, it never works for them. It didn't.
I agree with that. But oftentimes, Stephen, that we also have to analyze that the power and the impact of a wide receiver's words can be directly correlated with how good the quarterback is. So we don't oftentimes associate a Michael Irvin with being a destructive character in the locker room, because even though he was recognized as a leader, they also had Troy Aikman, who was the strong silent type and who was extremely proficient. Jerry Rice, every once in a while, he would throw his little tantrums as well. But because the Niners had Joe Montana and then later on they had Steve Young, it never really became an issue. Now with Terrell Owens, he had Jeff Garcia at quarterback. And then later on he had McNabb at quarterback, and he did not really respect those guys. So that's when it became a huge problem.
Didn't work for T.O. It worked against Randy Moss. It worked against Chris Carter. It worked against a whole bunch of Hall of Famers who never had to concern themselves with it. The Jerry Rices of the world, the Marvin Harrisons of the world.
Right, Jerry Rice played with Joe Montana. Marvin Harrison played with Peyton Manning. Remember, they played with elite level quarterbacks.
The Tim Browns of the world and
Well, Tim Brown is an exception. He was extremely laid back. He did not really have an elite level quarterback until Rich Gannon, unfortunately for him, at the end of his career.
And others, because when you play that receiver position, which is considered the most diva position in the National Football League, it's one of those positions where you can't open your mouth to the degree that Odell Beckham Jr. did and think that it's going to work best for you over the long haul.
Right, but Stephen A. Smith, in order for Odell to think on that level, he has to be a three-dimensional thinker. And he's not that. The brother's not thinking 5-6 steps down the line. All he's thinking about is immediate gratification, immediate glorification. I mean, even though he had a father in his life, quote unquote, anybody who has seen his dad, Odell Beckham's dad is one of these guys who's 50 years old and still thinks that he's 25 years old. Odell Beckham's dad was roommates with Shaq in college, so you already know what that's about. Shaq is still a big child, and Odell Beckham's dad is the same way. So I seriously doubt if he was able to impart on Odell any level of wisdom and discretion and clarity in regards to his judgments and his observations, things of that nature. And that's not even addressing the notion of him being a monarch athlete and an agent of chaos.
A Sunday afternoon is not indicative of the kind of impact this could ultimately have.
Okay, fine. We shall see, and it's better if the quarterback is the leader of the team. But you know, when the quarterback can't play as an NFL starter anymore, which, let's be honest, is what we're seeing, then at a certain point it's hard for him to lead the team. Let me ask.
Right, but once again, how different is Eli Manning playing right now than he's been playing the last 5 years? I mean, look up Eli's statistics. Max Kellerman acts like Eli Manning was playing at an Aaron Rodgers level, and all of a sudden he's dropped off. Eli has never been efficient or necessarily proficient. He's had about 4 borderline great years over a 15-year career. He's never been a great quarterback. He's had a couple of magic carpet runs, and that's been that.
Let me ask you this. They just took a one-loss team. They went on the road, and they, except for a 63-yard field goal, they won the game. Do you?
Actually, no, Max Kellerman. There's no such thing as except for they won the game. Maybe you mean had Carolina not made the 63-yard field goal, the New York Giants would have or could have won the game. That's how that goes. Most likely would have, because there was only 1 second left on the clock. But they lost. It's over. Carolina converted the field goal. So let's live in the real world.
You think the Giants' performance, the fact that they came back into the lead with 50 seconds in the game on the road against a very good team, had anything to do with Odell?
Of course I think it has something to do with Odell because he scored a touchdown. He also, hold on, whoa, wait a minute. It also has something to do with them losing because he messed up on the punt where it ultimately touched them, and it ended up being a touchdown for the Carolina Panthers. I mean, he didn't have a perfect game. Do you understand that since 2016, Odell Beckham Jr. is number 2 in dropped passes?
That's a great stat. I would bet that if you go back to the Josh Norman game, he's probably led the NFL in drops since the Josh Norman game, or number 2 since that game. Because that's when I noticed that he started to have a case of the drops. He's never been the same receiver since then. Prior to that game, I don't think that he ever dropped a pass in the NFL before the Josh Norman game. Josh Norman was able to penetrate into his psyche, and to be quite honest with you, the dude has never been the same since then. He's still been a great receiver, don't get it twisted. But on the level of the receiver that he was before that game, no.
Again, there are things to point to about. He's had like 16 drop passes over the last 2 years. Let's keep in mind that it's electrifying. Well, again,
but that's the point. No, the point is he's talking about other people falling short. You want people talking about how he's falling short?
Why do you think he did that? Why do you think he did that interview and sat down with Josina? What was his real agenda?
Well, first of all,
his real agenda is to make sure that everyone knows that, as Homeboy said in the movie Captain Phillips, I'm the captain now. Whenever you sit down with Josina Anderson, who basically is just a gossip columnist for the NFL, she just goes around, she gets a whole bunch of NFL players' phone numbers and tries to get the inside scoop on what's going on, all the gossipy shit. You're going to sit down with her on television and you're going to allow her to lean in and say, hey, homegirl, what's up with Eli? And you're actually going to respond to that silly shit. And then you have Lil Wayne sitting right next to you, looking like a spirit animal. And you're going to conform to that. That tells me that you really have no understanding of the team dynamic. And all that really was about was brand building, corporate brand building. But I expect that because you're a Nike asset.
Well, I thought Josina Anderson did a hell of a job in asking the kind of questions that people wanted to know.
Yeah, she did her job in asking those silly-ass questions, and he did a bad job in answering them. But Josina Anderson's skill is that she's able to make many of these black football players feel like she's their friend.
I do think that he was honest about it, and you know, he tries to be an honest guy and answer questions honestly. The problem is that he's only honest about the parts of himself that he wants to be honest about.
Of course, because he's a narcissist. He's self-obsessed. So how easy is it going to be for him to say, this is what I need to be doing? When the Giants gave him that money, basically that was their way of giving him the keys to their house. That's their way of saying, you know what? You have control of the whole thing. Odell's looking at it like Eli's almost 40 years old. He's not the best player on his team. He's not the most valuable or the most important player. He's not the most marketable player. All that is me. And I'm going to be here longer than him. That is Odell's mentality. Eli can act like he wants to be here as long as he wants. I'm going to be here longer than him. More likely than not, the Giants are probably going to try to draft a quarterback in this year's NFL draft, or they may even try to pick up one in free agency and get rid of Eli. Who the hell knows? Either way, Odell knows in his mind, at least that's what he thinks in his mind, he is the future.
He wasn't open about the kind of effect he has been having on this team over the last couple of years with some of his antics. There are guys that could say stuff about him too. And
he didn't say anything about it. He just said he kept it generic on purpose. He's like, we need to play with more heart and more energy. Well, and they did that in this game, whatever you want to say. They played with more energy.
If you watch Josina Anderson's interview, she asked him very direct questions.
Yes, she did. And Odell did not hesitate to throw many of his teammates under the bus. As well as the coaches, because he addressed the play calling as well.
So you can't look at just the answer. Sometimes it's how you phrased it and the manner in which you stated it that incriminated some other people, and it was clear what he was doing.
You can find comments like those from Saquon that liked it, but listen to the overwhelming message from the team. According to Fox's Jay Glazer, Sherman wanted him to apologize. Instead, they are using terms like you said. The locker room handled it. Does that sound like an endorsement of Odell's comments? How about the play on the field? Anyone want to address that? How about the play on the field? Did they play with more?
Max Kellerman, sir, once again, people are trying to let you know that everything is not just about the immediate response. When you have emotions that are simmering, this can reverberate down the line, sir. You have to understand that you just can't look at it from a fanboy perspective.
with more energy than they had all season, yes or no?
Yes.
Did they go on the road and have a lead with 50 seconds to go, yes or no?
There have been plenty of times, Max, that you have taken a position, and then 2 or 3 weeks later you had to alter it because you realized the collateral damage that it had.
Ding.
It's not all about yesterday.
All right.
It's not about evidence as of right now.
Well, as of right now, that's how you feel. All right, let's see if it stays that way.
Like a chick. A chick always is just concerned about how she feels right now. A man's supposed to see certain things down the line.
That way. Well, good to see you as always. We'll talk soon.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see what comes of this whole Odell Beckham situation. There's no doubt in my mind that he is a ticking time bomb, and he will be not only for whatever franchise he plays with or on, but also for himself, because he's very tempestuous and he's shown very little ability to control himself. But anyway, peace.